This movie was easily the most anticipated movie for 2024 for many people. I mean, they were adapting one of the most beloved and best Sonic stories ever, Sonic Adventure 2. That game was already written like a big cinematic movie, so it seems like it'd be perfect for an adaptation. But if I'm gonna be honest, I was not that excited. Don't get me wrong, the first two movies definitely were good and were pretty fun, but that's the thing, they weren't really anything that special to me, so I was wondering how they could faithfully adapt the original video game, especially considering the first two movies aren't exactly known for their faithful recreations of the games, and more so, I was worried they were just gonna shove in cheesy jokes all the time. But turns out, when I watched the movie, I pleasantly enjoyed it, especially with the amount of references and fan service there was. But I knew I wanted to give this a more critical look and actually be more honest with myself here, so I went to rewatch it, and after rewatching it, I still absolutely love this movie. Though there is one major issue that I will touch on soon. First of all, I know I'm not the first one to say this, but wow, this movie is actually gorgeous. The colors just pop off. The choreography, especially near the final act, just really hits in well. The action, the CGI, the budget, you can really tell they wanted to avoid a lot of that Marvel problems that have been plaguing the VFX industry. A lot of these shots really do feel like they come out of little Sonic intros and animations that you would see in the games. And of course, another part of the presentation, audio. The sound effects are of course great as usual. I'm sort of getting a little bit tired of the whole lightning sound effects that they've been using, but aside from that, the sound effects are great. I love the music. The music has taken a substantial step up from its predecessors. The first two Sonic movies were kinda for their music. There weren't really anything special, and none of the tracks were memorable. They were all just generic Hollywood orchestral noise. Meanwhile, with movie 3, we've got some cool guitar riffs going on here, some nice leitmotifs, and of course, some music from the games actually. Surprisingly, this time around, Junkie XL was given full freedom, well, seemingly almost full freedom, and he looks like he did his research. Without spoiling, there's a certain song that plays near the end of the film that references something, and I mean like the very end of the film that references something from Sonic Adventure 2. And I literally lost it when I heard it. Oh my god, it got me so emotional just hearing that version from Junkie XL. As for the writing of this film, I won't lie, it was sort of more messy, but the themes and character arcs here were way more well done. Nothing here, it lacks importance like in movie 2 where they just shoved in subplots and stuff that really had nothing to do or served zero purpose with the film whatsoever. Everything here serves a great purpose, and I absolutely love the way they approach things, especially when it comes to adapting things from the game. Again, without getting into spoilers, they make some certain creative decisions, which, for the most part, I do enjoy. The humor is actually more funny. They saved the worst jokes for the trailers.
Konnichiwa!
But aside from that, I actually surprisingly enjoyed the humor, but my biggest issue is how messy it all is. Because the writing in general is sort of more messy, and that mainly is a consequence of the film's pace. Because everything goes at such breakneck, quick, and tight speeds that it doesn't really give you much time to breathe. And some of the more serious scenes are immediately followed up with comedic ones, which don't really do a good job at handling the film's tone. The film's tone can be all over the place. We can go from something incredibly serious to something comedic. General thoughts on Sonic Movie 3. It's a fun and great kids family movie that does a good job at adapting Sonic Adventure 2. It's not perfect by any means, but it actually is one of my favorite movies of the year. So by all means, go watch it. Now, those are just my general thoughts, and I'll be getting into spoilers now. So if you don't want to see spoilers now, please come back to this video later once you've actually seen the film. This discussion happens nearly every single time a Sonic project releases, and it's about the characterization, specifically how characters are portrayed and how they act. Because the Sonic movies are no different from that. If you haven't noticed, Sonic acts completely different in the movies than he does in the games, which isn't the biggest deal in the world. The movies are clearly doing their own thing, and are in a different universe, but does being in a different universe give an excuse to make entirely different characters? Again, you're making an adaptation here, not a completely different thing. If you're adapting something, then you should be taking the base core ideas and spirit of the original thing while expanding upon it or putting your own unique spin. Movie Sonic isn't your own unique spin. Movie Sonic is just a completely different character entirely. But this has been an issue present since the first film, and Jeff Fowler has clearly said that he's wanted to keep Movie Sonic grounded and relatable. So it seems like we won't be getting a more accurate Movie Sonic anytime soon, which I don't have the biggest issue in the world with personally. Yes, I do love Game Sonic, and I would take him any day of the week over Movie Sonic, but it's not really that big of a deal. I'll only start really complaining if they make a Mario and Sonic crossover movie and we get Movie Sonic meeting up with Mario instead of Game Sonic, but that probably won't happen anytime soon. Now, as for other characters, Knuckles in the last movie, it was very interesting to see him in this movie, and they do follow up on his character arc from the second movie very nicely, where I thought that in the second movie his character arc was a tiny bit rushed, but they did handle it very well. In this movie, they do a really good job at explaining how much Knuckles as a character has progressed since then, even with subtle hints to the Knuckles show of all things. While you still don't need to watch the Knuckles show to understand the plot of this movie, but you do need to watch the first two films. And as for Tails, I gotta say, the bar is kind of in hell for Tails. I'm sorry, Tails fans, but literally in all of Sonic Movie 2, Tails was just glazing Sonic. Like, it was honestly really annoying, and I'm glad we finally moved past that part of his character specifically. And in this movie, Team Sonic follows as they're recruited by G.U.N to secure Project Shadow. Again, another out of character thing, but whatever. And as for G.U.N in this movie, again, I really love what they do here. They do a great job at establishing them as a mixture between an evil threat and a sort of good entity. Because I do think that certain things in this film don't get explained or catched up on very well. Like, for example, right, Shadow, he takes off his inhibitor rings, which it's never explained what they're supposed to do. So to a normal person in the audience, they're just gonna be like, oh, okay, whatever. But obviously to us Sonic fans, we know what he's doing, which I feel like the film should have explained it if it had a better pacing and more time to breathe and elaborate on his backstory more. And again, with the pacing of this film, I do feel like Movie Shadow's character arc here was a bit rushed, per se. Not that it was, like, bad, the scene that he finally gets a redemption, but I feel like there should have been more time given to the scene, because it literally is like 40 seconds total, and then we move on to the next thing. I feel like we could have had Shadow and Sonic talking at least a little bit more, but that's aside from the point. This happens with G.U.N many times, where it's just sort of like, it doesn't feel like a lot of things get resolved near the end of the film with G.U.N. Also, what the hell was Captain Rockwell's character supposed to be? She just like shows up and it feels like they're trying to set up something with her, and then we just never get that resolution. And it's just one of the main issues with G.U.N just never getting a resolution in the film. It's just kind of weird. They just really do disappear at some point in the film, and all that conflict and tension that we were building up to, where Sonic was sort of trying to interrogate them because they didn't even know if like G.U.N was supposed to be good or not. Sonic never confronts G.U.N at all at any point near the end of the film to sort of get a resolution with them and sort of like ask them to explain what was going on and what they were doing with Shadow. That never ends up happening. Speaking of Shadow, I gotta talk about Shadow's origin in this movie, because in this movie they do make quite the substantial changes from the source material. Because in the original games, Shadow was actually created by someone. Shadow was born on the Space Colony ARK with Professor Gerald Robotnik, and Gerald Robotnik created Project Shadow to be the cure for his granddaughter Maria, and in process creating the ultimate life form because the government wanted a super deadly weapon. Now, in the films, this goes off very differently. First of all, there is no Space Colony ARK on the films. I get it, they want to keep things more grounded, but there's a different consequence to seals, which I'll talk about later. But with Shadow not being made on the Space Colony ARK, Gerald didn't even make him at all. Shadow is explained to be an alien, likely created by Black Doom, which the movies haven't touched on yet. I'd imagine they're probably keeping that whole plot line in the Shadow spin-off movie. But you couldn't even like touch on his origin a little bit. I feel like there were some things you could have done here to expand on his backstory more, because there is a lot of loose threads here that they could have ended up building off of, and they just end up not doing anything with it at all. Again, I feel like if the movie had more time, this would have not been an issue. But Shadow was mostly taken care of by Maria in the source material, and the same applies in here the movies. Maria Robotnik, the granddaughter of Gerald Robotnik in both the game and the film, was mostly a cheerful, innocent, young, optimistic person. But in the films, she is way more playful. Like in the games, she was described to be playful, but in the movies, it's way more up here. However, one crucial part of her character has been missing, because you see in the original games, Maria, she had to immediately be taken on the Space Colony ARK to live with his grandfather at a very young age, because she developed the sickness known as NIDS, or Neuroimmune Deficiency Syndrome, which you see kept her very lonely on the Ark for most of her life, being separated from her family and only being able to talk to Gerald and the researchers who board the Ark. But you see, Maria's loneliness is never really touched on in this movie, which I feel like, again, that would have been a good thing to elaborate on. And the movie does sort of allude to it. We do see Maria sort of just trying to make the most of her life before coming across Shadow, but it mostly doesn't really have the same emphasis that the games had. Especially with Maria's sickness, it kept her from playing around that much. The low gravity of the Ark subdued her illness, and as a result, she was able to actually live on the Ark, whereas on Earth, she would be having much more problem. Despite this, she needed constant medical attention. But again, the film doesn't have NIDS at all, which means all that loneliness she had and all of that, I feel like it would have really made something more touching and heartfelt and emotional. She still has trouble navigating the world with her illness, and maybe it could show Shadow that he's not a complete monster, and in fact, he's using his powers for good for some people, since he's helping treat Maria's illness. And it could help him with his doubts about, is he really a monster? And I love the little thing they do here, because you see, Shadow watches a movie and it sees like the Biolizard. It's so funny, and he thinks that maybe he's like that monster. Maybe the scientists see him like the Biolizard in that movie. And oh my god, what an absolutely cute way of integrating a reference and fan service in with the actual plot and story. That was really well done. Speaking of which, Gerald, and another very important part of Maria's backstory is Gerald Robotnik. In the games, after Gerald lost Maria, he went insane and spent his last days in prison plotting out his revenge against Earth, finishing up Project Shadow and altering Shadow's memories to make him help out in destroying the Earth. He's briefly mentioned throughout the events of the game, but we really don't get to know all this until near the end of the game, where we see a creepy pre-recorded message explaining all his plans to destroy Earth. The film was originally going to follow up this plotline more, but Jeff Fowler, the director of the films, realized the sheer comedic potential with two characters played by Jim Carrey at the same time on screen, as well as the family conflict that could be created with it. To the credit of the film, they actually did keep a lot of that stuff in. Gerald is still Maria's grandfather. He still goes insane after losing Maria, just in a more comedic way. That dark and menacing presence is replaced with more Jim Carrey. However, that's not to say that he doesn't have his dark moment. The film has this major reveal that he wanted to straight up destroy the planet, even if it meant himself in the process. That was seriously messed up and dark. I absolutely loved it. This would have been perfect. Just follow up this newly established dark tone with that menacing Gerald we love from the games. Well, it's extremely disappointing that the next scene with him is a comedic robot crab fight, followed by him farting into getting vaporized. Bro, okay, look, my issue isn't the joke itself per se, no, far from it. I found the whole Eggman versus Gerald crab fight really funny, actually. My issue is how the joke is used and where it's placed. Because that's the thing, we're coming off of multiple intense and serious moments here, Like, Gerald's motivation was really messed up, and we just immediately cut to humor next time we see Eggman and Gerald. And I get it, it's a kid's movie. You want to keep everything lighthearted and want to avoid delving into how dark it is. But it's the freaking climax of the movie, bro. Like, at least tone it down a little bit. Maybe you don't have to, like, actually make it dark per se. Just at least keep it grand and climactic. At least in Gerald's final moments, you could have done something serious here. Like, it's literally just 2 scenes left with them. You couldn't have done something, right? I feel like a mech fight would have been way more fitting, and you could have actually referenced the original games while you were at it with that. But I guess robot crab fight was more in the books. It really could have prevented the film by making Gerald more ominous and menacing presence. And look, I get it, we're not expecting Gerald's entire character to change just because he all of a sudden has his motivations revealed. But come on, even Gerald pre-insanity, post-insanity in the films can take something of seriousness, especially considering Eggman was clearly emotional hearing that he couldn't rule the world with Gerald. Speaking of the endings to characters, one character that I've avoided to mention up until now was Eggman, because I am a seriously huge fan of Eggman in the films. I love the way his character is, because in the games, Eggman is a sociopath, egotistical maniac that's like everything bad about humanity, and also a bit childish. In the movies, he is like a lot of just that, and it's cranked up to 90 with like Jim Carrey's acting. And no better is it present in this film specifically. Eggman is just really funny, and he bounces off with Gerald very well. His whole character conflict was honestly great to see, especially with Agent Stone. And the fact that his character went out like that, I can't believe it. Eggman actually sacrificed himself. I don't even know what to think of this, because are we seriously gonna get Sonic movie 4 without Eggman? A Sonic movie without Eggman. And judging by the post-credits scene, it looks like we might actually be getting a shot at that. Because you see, the post-credits scene kicks off right where the film left off on. Because we see Sonic coming across a Metal Sonic who didn't appear by like a portal or like Agent Stone like creating it. No, he just zapped in. And I don't even know when Agent Stone or whoever made this got the time to make it. As a horde of Metal Sonics surround Sonic. And then immediately following that, Amy spin dashes right in through the Metal Sonics and appears. And I love Amy's design, by the way. Like, wow, they actually did not just do a recolor this time like they did with movie 2's credits. And made like a sort of rush design like they did with movie 1's credits. No. Amy looks fantastic here. So if I have to nitpick, come on, her hammer, bro. They're gonna have to rename her hammer, because Pico Pico Hammer from the games means toy hammer. I don't know what else to say, but Amy's hammer here is not a toy hammer. They like sci-fi MCU-ified her hammer, okay? And I'm gonna be honest, Amy fans, give up all hope now, because she is not gonna be the silly, spunky, compassionate girl that she is from the games. She is just gonna be Girl Boss 101, which, you could have given that to Rouge or Blaze, but whatever. I guess Amy is the more popular character, so you wanted to give her that instead. Even though it would have been way more fitting for Blaze and Rouge, you know, I'm just saying you should have brought in Blaze and Rouge. Anyways, very curious to see what they do with Amy. It looks like the roles are already reversed here. As we can see, Amy is saving Sonic rather than Sonic saving Amy, like in Sonic CD. So yeah, it looks like Amy is not going to get captured by Metal Sonic in the games, which, whatever. That's a pretty big deviation from her original character. And the games, Amy was a pretty normal girl, right? But she was admittedly controversial, but I don't think Amy as a concept of a character is bad, right? I just think the way they executed things was sort of bad in the games. And I feel like the movie should hold on to it. Keep a lot of personality traits that game Amy held, just tone some things down, and elaborate more on other things, right? Give her a real character arc, and you know, maybe this could actually be like the best version of Amy if they play their cards right, in both like an adaptation sense and just generally as a character sense. Meanwhile, I don't really have much thoughts on Metal Sonic. I'm very, very, very worried as to how the movie team will handle Metal Sonic because I am the biggest Metal Sonic fan ever. If you haven't noticed, I am literally remaking my Metal Sonic video, okay? Guys, I literally cannot express to you how important he is to me. Metal Sonic and his whole character arc of an identity crisis in Sonic Heroes, I'm gonna be honest, I have no hope of them adapting his whole character identity crisis arc of Sonic Heroes. No, they're not gonna do it, okay? I really just do not have any hope. I'm very pessimistic about the whole thing. On a more positive note, the end credits scene also happened. We finally have an end credits scene in a Sonic movie, and it's Shadow being alive, which literally no one is surprised by that. I've seen a lot of critics say that they definitely hate the end credits, which, I mean, it's fair, right? At a first glance, it seems like that undermines the entire film, but if you know anything like I do as a Sonic fan, you'll know this is probably him going through his memory loss arc, which ends up with him deciding to move on from the past and becoming a completely different person, which is a really sick idea to adapt to a film if they actually do it. I hope they do it. I don't know if they will do it. We'll just have to wait and see, and then maybe I'll judge if that end credit scene was actually good or not. I hope Eggman stays cooked because I mean, Jim Carrey's gonna retire, right? And it feels like, okay, maybe I'll do it one last time for Sonic Movie 4. And then Sonic Movie 5, he's just not there. Yeah. I feel like Agent Stone should take up the title and mantle of Eggman now. I feel like that's probably the best move they have to play. But yeah, that whole Gerald and Eggman thing is just really a huge microcosm of the whole movie's biggest problem. The pacing. Because the movie goes by so fast. It has a pretty short runtime. I feel like 20 more minutes or so really could have benefited the movie. Because the big issue with this is that everything goes so fast that we go immediately from a serious scene to a comedic scene, back to a serious scene to a comedic scene. It was like no time to breathe or little room to think about what's actually happening. And I feel like it really is a detriment to the whole movie in general. And it honestly gives the movie a way more messy feel to its writing that I feel like the first two movies really did not have. My main advice for the next movie is take things slow, give us time to breathe between scenes, and take your serious scenes actually seriously. I don't need Jim Carrey to just be all jokey when we just have like the darkest reveal ever just happening. And I do love the change that they made with Gerald not manipulating Shadow's memories into destroying the world. This time, it was Shadow being blinded and consumed by his rage and anger, which left the more convoluted sides of the Sonic Adventure 2 plot out of the way. You can really tell that they did some changes here to avoid a lot of the plot holes that the original Sonic Adventure 2 had. Like that whole fake emerald thing is just not here at all. But as a consequence, two amazing moments from Sonic Adventure 2 are cut, which, I mean, it's alright. I guess it does make sense. Movie Sonic is a completely different character, so he probably wouldn't even react this way in these scenarios. Which, yes, again, these are pretty fair changes, and again, I can see the thought process behind them, especially given Movie Sonic's character and what they have to work with. They do a faithful recreation of SA2's story, while also keeping in mind the pre-established tone of the first two movies and what they had going on. Which, overall, yeah, not only does it do a good job of being an adaptation, it just is a fun movie in general. Again, aside from the pacing, I think that this movie is great and honestly is worth checking out more than the first two movies. But if I'm gonna be honest with you, if you didn't like the first two movies, you're probably not gonna like Sonic Movie 3. Because they really lean into Jim Carrey's humor more than ever here. And I'd argue it works the best here. But at times it can be a detriment to the movie's tone. I don't have an intro though, so go read One Piece.